Hey everyone, Ryan from First Edition's Shrubs and Trees. Welcome to one of my favorite versions of Garden Gab. We are here with our very good friend, author, speaker, garden designer, all of the above, Mr. Kelly Norris.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
It's so good to be back with you and in person and in a garden that you designed.
It's so wonderful to be here. Even though it's late in the season, it's beautiful to see the garden and all of these great plants that are here, trucking into the last moments of the growing season. It's really beautiful.
Well, and it's only been a year since we did all this project. And so being able to be back in the garden, see how things have taken off like crazy has been so fun.
Yeah, that first year of a garden's life or a new planting's life is always just like watching an adolescent sort of grow up, right? They have, sort of long legs and they're learning to do all these things, and plants are kind of getting situated, and we're really seeing what's succeeding and what's thriving, and really learning from the garden in the first year about how plants are interacting with each other in this place.
So when you were working on this, knowing that this is a display garden for the brand and to showcase how these plants can be used in a home landscape, even though this is not in front of a home, what was your approach to how we did this?
Well, when we were doing this garden, I think we described it as being the garden of 1,000 vignettes, and that each of these little moments that we bring plants together are kind of postcards and pictures that could potentially live on for years and inspire people for how to utilize perennials and shrubs and small trees together in the footprint of their residential home garden. And so what's really nice to be able to come see in this first year is how many of those ideas on paper and in our minds when we were working on the garden have really come to bear fruit and really look like something very legible and demonstrates what's possible for home gardens.
So knowing that we're here in fall, thinking about seasonality when you were doing the design, tell us a little bit how you think about that and how we can, like, a home gardener can translate that into what they do.
Well, I think the great thing about shrubs, especially in the First Editions collection, is that they're plants that check multiple boxes, right? So for a garden design like this, where we're really thinking about the life of the garden from the waking moments in spring all the way until these final few bars of the growing season, we're really thinking about the features of plants as they change throughout the season, whether that's their flowers, which are obvious and overt, but for many shrubs, it's their foliage, it's their form, it's the fruits, it's kind of the other things that kind of go along with the whole big picture of the plant that can really give us a lot of mileage throughout the growing season. So at this time in October, we're looking at fall colors and how things are subtly changing as the nights get cooler and the days get shorter, and we're seeing those kind of kaleidoscopic effects of plants interacting in these very colorful ways, even now at this late point in the season.
Let's talk about one of your favorites for this time of year, for fall.
Well, I walked in the garden this afternoon and was completely awestruck by Fireside Ninebark, a just rich and intense, practically black-leaved ninebark. That this time of the year, that rich color is sort of an exception. Everything else is turning yellow and orange, and it's so nice to be able to have a very rich red and black toned foliage at this time of the year. And so we saw that when we walked in this afternoon with the blue asters and the grasses, and it's one dramatic moment even now in this last hour of the growing season.
Well, and with ninebark, so many can be susceptible to powdery mildew, and we've got that really deep foliage. To have it be clean this late in the season and have that backdrop of beautiful other colors, and it's right in front of that white diamonds hydrangea as well, and so to have those play off of each other and have that clean foliage
it's
is
notable.
So important.
It's very distinctive in that way, and I think that's something, again, when we're thinking about the colorful aspects of how plants evolve and change in the growing season, we have to keep in mind that they have to still be good, growing, thriving, healthy plants, and to be able to do that. So disease resistance and those kinds of things are extremely important, so that we can get to that final moment of the growing season and still be looking that good.
So one of our other favorite plants that we were just talking about that is underutilized but should be used more, you think of typically in the spring, lotus moon pearl bush, where it's absolutely covered in those beautiful white flowers. but it has great fall interest too.
Oh, it has a resting fall color. The usual sort of that plant can have kind of yellowy, lemony fall color, but Lotus Moon has a sort of cider colored, almost something on the pumpkin tone that this time of the year is a surprising partner to many of the grasses, especially the golden sunset Indian grass that we have here in the garden, and just really glows in this kind of low afternoon light. It's still playing a key structural role in the garden even at the very end of the season.
So one of the other plants that we both love that I already mentioned, White Diamond's hydrangea.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about how you paired that in this garden, especially with the grasses in front of it, and how they play together and what makes that so visually appealing.
It's such an elegant plant at really all moments of the growing season. Of course, people plant panicle hydrangeas and the like because of that sort of late summer, August, September moment when they come to flower and they begin to transition and the bracts go to pink and red and whatnot. But in the case of White Diamonds, its color is so kind of there's an antique quality to it. And so what I did when we thought about how to relate this very established plant here in the garden, maybe one of the oldest ones that's out there here, to show people what to do with it, we utilized a variegated form of Molinia, which by itself can be a rather loud and kind of raucous player in the garden. But that juxtaposition ends up actually creating something that's quite vivid and vibrant, and a vibrant moment in the garden, especially now with the White Diamonds beginning to take on that soft pink tone, soft yellow, and it's just of the grass underneath of it. It's almost acting as a sort of skirt, and it feels it's something that feels kind of pastoral and kind of country-like. You can imagine anybody across the country having a split rail fence and a big hydrangea, and it's really two plants, and it's succeeding on the merits of both.
So one of the other things we talked about is color echoes and how you create this visual path through the garden, and even things like the love child the sweet spire that we were looking at, how you use that repetition. Can you explain how people can take that into their home landscape and what it does visually for people to create sort of that holistic experience?
Well, in this garden and in many gardens that I work on, I think about I want to try and get as much plant diversity in there as we can, especially here. We've got a lot of shrubs in the collection. We've got a lot of things that we want to show and demonstrate for people. But when you start to get a lot of things happening, it can sometimes get a little overwhelming. And so it's really important in every season to have one or a few plants that are abundant, that are really can carry the show visually throughout the season. It's good for pollinators and creatures too, because we need to have a banquet set for all these things. So this time of year, it's the asters that we're carrying through the garden in so many places. That last little bit of blue and purple, really strong color this time of year against these warmer shades that we're seeing as the colors start to change in the trees and the shrubs, becomes so critical to create a sense of unity and repetition and almost theme throughout the garden. So we utilize the asters a lot in that way. But the colors, even among several different asters, or you mentioned the Itea, which is really bright red right now, but there's bright red roses trying to rebloom. There's maples over to the side, the Matador maple. And so we even can take a single property of the plant, like a color, and utilize that in a given season among different kinds of plants at different layers of the landscape, so to speak, to create something that feels very interesting and yet cohesive at the same time.
So when you're planting, obviously we've got a huge mix of plants in here. How do you use shrubs mixed with the perennials to create a really cohesive look?
Well, shrubs are an important structural player, right? I mean, oftentimes a home garden inherits a tree or a couple of trees or maybe a hedge or something. But shrubs help us start to, like big pieces of furniture in the living room, and help to start relate the scale of the garden to us as gardeners, as users, as appreciators of public or private space if we're doing this at home. So, there's these big comfy chairs and the couches and the little end tables. These are what shrubs do in the gardens. They provide us these scaffold of sorts that we can then, put grasses and perennials and all kinds of flowers and things around. And so the great thing about, again, shrubs in the first editions collection is that we have quite an assortment of diversity, everything from roses to other native plants, nine barks, and my favorite, Cephalanthus fiberoptics. I mean, we can name check all of our favorites, but even though they're quite different, they're plants that grow in a great variety of conditions, they all have a similar function. They can be a set piece around which other things can play. They star, of course, at certain moments of the season, as we've just said. We've called out our favorites now. But they become so important for holding the more finer, detailed, perennial floral layers of the garden together. And that's why every garden almost has to have them. They become so essential.
So the hardest question of all is what everyone's favorite plant is. And you can't pick that. But if you had to choose this time of year, so if we can narrow the scope a little bit, what your favorite shrub is, even in this garden, this time of year, what would you go with?
Well, we've called out a lot of favorites, and one that we've not mentioned that I think is worth noting right now is Iceberg Alley, our incredible selection of a very cold hardy willow that's came to the program from Canada. So we know it has bone cold hardiness. It's very tough. And actually what's really interesting about Iceberg Alley is that species of willow is not really common in the wild. It's a very rare plant. So you might think, well, how could a plant that's so rare in the wild be so broadly versatile and adaptable? And then comes along Iceberg Alley that teaches us that sometimes what we think we know about plants isn't always true. And even now, at this late date in the season, that silvery, soft color is such a disruption of expectations that it becomes a prime mover in one of our favorite vignettes here in the garden, where we've got heucheras and grasses and alliums, plants that are very accessible and very useful and good for pollinators and creatures that we share the garden with, all playing together so nicely because of that Iceberg Alley kind of holding it all in the mix. And of course, that plant is as good and worth talking about at the first moments of spring, when those very first flowers come out, when there's practically nothing else in bloom in the garden. So important for early pollinators to have something out there like that, our native flies and bees and wasps and all this. And then it carries that on, month after month for 6 or 7 weeks, even in a cold climate like Minnesota, and yet does that really consistently across probably the northern half of the country. So I can't pick a favorite, but I have to make sure we get Iceberg Alley some coverage.
Well, and that color is so adaptable and versatile, and being able to have it into this part of the season when everything else is changing and adding that heat to the landscape, having that beautiful silvery backdrop is such a nice touch.
And silver is sort of one of those kind of classic neutrals, and it's not a common color in the garden. So it's nice to be able to bring it into the fold as a kind of contemporary, maybe sheen to the more classic assortment of perennials we have around it. So it's different, it's unexpected, it's versatile, it's adaptable. How many adjectives can we come up with to say that we love Iceberg Alley?
Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It's always such a treat to have you and to be able to show what all of your work did after just one season. We can't wait to see what it does the next few.
Many more seasons to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for tuning in today, and we will see you next time on Garden Gab.